Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 1 of the Exploring the BABOK Guide webinar series. Thank you for joining us today to explore the BABOK Guide. Thank you to IIBA for making this and webinars like it possible. Of course, IIBA is the professional association dedicated to developing the professional and developing the profession. Today, we have an august panel for you as our inaugural episode. We have Kathleen Barrett, President and CEO of IIBA, who is joining us to share a little bit about why the BABOK Guide is so important both to the community and to IIBA itself. Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you very much. Part of the reason why this webinar is so important to me personally is that, as it says up here on the slide, I've been part of the organization since its inauguration. And from the very beginning, the BABOK was the focus of our efforts as an organization, defining that standard that we could use as a basis to do the work that we needed to do for our organizations. So I'm very pleased that we're offering this opportunity to share with you a bit more about it and to engage the broader community in helping us evolve and enhance this standard.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. We also have Kevin Brennan, who is in many ways the architect of the BABOK Guide. He's responsible for a lot of things at IIBA, and I'll let him talk about that himself. But he's also been involved since very early on. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, I got involved in IIBA very shortly after Kathleen did in November of 2003. So I've been with the organization since the beginning and also involved in the development of the BABOK since the beginning, so back in October of 2004, and it's mildly terrifying to me to see both how long we've been working on it and how far it's come. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to hear from all of you and talk to all of you about what it is, where we're going with it, and what you think we need to do in the future to make it continue to be useful to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very curious about those things too. And my name, of course, is Julian Sammy. I work for IIBA as well. I am an enterprise business analyst. I report to Kevin, actually. And I've been doing a lot of work on the BABOK Guide for several years now. I'm part of a core team that is developing version 3 and have been very involved in talking about version 2, figuring out how we can improve it, and really taking a deep dive into the complexities and some of the things that are not as obvious in version 2 that can help you become a better business analyst. And that's really why we are bringing this webinar series out now. The point is to talk about the BABOK Guide from a different point of view, from a practical point of view in many ways, but also to explore it from the point of view of thought leaders and experts in the community and in the business analysis field. So we're going to talk about the BABOK Guide in a different way than perhaps you might have seen in other webinars. Generally, we'll have panels, we'll have people who will be able to have conversations, bring different points of view and different interpretations. And before anybody gets too concerned about it, the version 3 is not going to be released anytime enormously soon. It's scheduled for 2014, so get certified now. Do study version 2. Okay, let's move on. Let me talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today and how this webinar will work. And basically, Kathleen's going to start us off with a little bit of information about the BABOK Guide and IIBA's place in the business analysis community. I'll talk about what this webinar series will look like and what kinds of things you can expect as you join us month after month. And Kevin is going to talk about the business analysis body of knowledge itself, what it is, what it isn't, how it's structured. When we do these webinars, we will generally have 30 minutes or so of presentation and 30 minutes of questions and answers. What that means is that these webinars are all about what you need to know, what you're curious about, your ideas, your opinions. We want to know. So please do tell us what you want to know. You can use the question interface that you see in GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar as your primary means of communication with us, and we'll go through as many of your questions as we can. And by the way, don't wait till the end to ask your questions. That's the wrong time for us to be able to answer them. Ask them early as you can. And with that, I'm going to hand over the baton to Kathleen Barrett to talk a little bit about the BABOK Guide and IIBA. Kathleen.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian. So I get to sort of kick this whole thing off by giving you all a context. The reason why we have this slide here is it does provide you with an understanding of what we are as an organization, and you can see where the body of knowledge sits. One of the things we went through last year, and I think it's an important thing for all organizations to go through, is to reassess why you exist. What is the value you bring to the marketplace? And fundamentally, the thing that makes IIBA special or unique is that we are the standards body. It's not that we go and create this all by ourselves. We do this by engaging the broader BA community, literally all over the world. But it is the foundation of everything we offer as an organization, and that is the business analysis body of knowledge, as well as our competency model, which is also aligned with the body of knowledge. And although I won't go into any detail, I think it's important to understand how that standard embeds itself in everything else that we do. We provide assessments, and one of the things you'll be seeing going forward is an online competency assessment for individuals who are interested in understanding how well they perform business analysis. And that assessment, again, is tied to the body of knowledge, the activities and tasks identified in the body of knowledge. We want to integrate the opportunities for improvement identified in the assessment through our learning and development pillar, which is providing you things like this webinar today and other tools to help you enhance your knowledge and ability to execute on the standards that we've identified. And then the third pillar up here is the recognition and certification, that formal identification that you've achieved an important milestone in your career. Now there's a fourth pillar here, which is what we are doing right here, and that is engaging the entire community of business analysis professionals to understand the direction that we're going and to understand how they can participate and contribute to this very, very important standard in what they do day in and day out. So we truly bring to you the ability to pull together the community to drive forward the standards of business analysis. So this is where I get to turn it back over to Kevin and Julian, because they're going to share with you the details. I will be available at the end of the call to participate in questions that you may have, but keep in mind that this is so fundamental to us, and your participation in this discussion today is absolutely crucial to our success as an organization.
Thanks, Kathleen. That's a lovely way to begin all of this, and I appreciate you taking the time to share some of this with the folks who are on the line. We have a fairly large audience today, too, so it's good to get the word out. And, you know, carrying on from Kathleen, the BABOK Guide is the foundation for the practice of business analysis, but it's not the final word. It's not the end of your expertise or your knowledge. It's really where you begin. And this webinar series is an attempt to help expose you to and share with you those interpretations, those experiences, and those next steps. Like, what do you do after the BABOK Guide? So if it's the basis, this series is intended to help you to take the next step. This series will have lots of discussion. You will hear lots of experiences. You'll hear many points of view, many of those points of view which I may or may not agree with, and I'll be a regular panelist on this, along with other folks who you'll see again and again. What you won't hear is anyone claiming that they are right, that this is the only interpretation. This is not a directive. This is not the last word. What we're trying to do here is help you see what the first words are and to interpret the BABOK Guide in new ways. This is partly inspired by a presentation that I know Kathleen was at Building Business Capability Conference, the BBC conference, that Barb Karkanord did, where she reinterpreted solution assessment and validation in a really fantastic way. And we're going to try to bring that same kind of vision and spice into looking at the BABOK Guide, seeing it from a different point of view. So our approach here is going to be opinionated discussions among BA thought leaders and experts. You're going to hear a lot of discussion during these webinars, not a huge amount of formal presentation, although there will be some. And then we'll get into question and answer as early as we can to make sure that your voice is the main voice. That means that we're going to focus the conversation on a lot of different topics. I think I've got 9 here that are just the barest beginnings of the kinds of topics we want to talk about. You can see that it's not really broken down by, say, an underlying competency or a particular task or element within the body of knowledge. We're trying to look at this from a point of view of the kinds of things that BAs deal with every day and ways that your understanding of the body of knowledge can really help you to be more effective in what you do. I'm particularly looking forward to the requirements and designs discussion, which I expect will be fairly fiery and interesting. So with that, just a couple more notes about how to participate. You're already on this session, of course, so you can click the links. You can add your questions and comments, and I see people adding questions now. Please add your questions early. We will get to them in a little while. They're all in the queue, so please do ask for questions now. You can see that we have a link there, community.iiba.org/BABOK3. That's a short link that works for IIBA members. If you're not an IIBA member, you'll get a login prompt from that. You can just go to community.iiba.org and you can look in the groups for the BABOK group. And actually, it's not even BABOK3. The link is supposed to be BABOK. And on Twitter, you can use hashtag BABOK to talk to us during the show. And tell everybody, these webinars are public. They're open to everyone. Tell your friends. Tell everyone who you know who would benefit from a deeper exploration of the BABOK guide. And groups welcome. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to the man who has been shepherding the BABOK guide along since the beginning, to Kevin Brennan, to talk a bit about how the BABOK guide is structured and what it's for. Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Julian. So we started working on the body of knowledge a long time ago, and coming into it, it wasn't like any of us had previous experience building a body of knowledge, especially not from scratch. So we had to really figure out what we were trying to do and fundamentally what the purpose of a body of knowledge is, as opposed to, a textbook or some other field guide. And fundamentally, the purpose of a body of knowledge is twofold. First of all, it's important to remember that it is a guide to the business analysis body of knowledge and not the body of knowledge itself. The body of knowledge as a whole for business analysis is much larger than you can contain in any 1 or even 10 books, right? IIBA has an online library of, I believe, 325 books. All of those are, in a sense, part of the business analysis body of knowledge, as are books that we don't have in the online library, as are webinars, as are white papers, as are Twitter conversations. I mean, the body of knowledge fundamentally is everything that is known about business analysis by anybody. The BABOK guide is a book which tells you what things are part of that body of knowledge, what things are part of the business analysis profession. And so the purpose of this book really is to set out a definition for what is necessary in order to perform business analysis, and to provide an overall framework to structure our knowledge of the profession. So in version 2, we structured it around knowledge areas and tasks or activities that a business analyst is called on to perform. With version 3 now, we're extending that to include not just a set of tasks, but also a core concept model. That is a set of concepts which are fundamental and universal across all business analysis activity, so that we can now talk about what a requirement is and how it relates to a design and how both those things relate to process models, and that we actually have a way to have a consistent treatment of those concepts and relationships between them. So that's a lot of work, and as we go through this, we'll be getting into all that information. So version 2 is really the first version of the BOK that was complete, that had all the content across all the chapters. Those of you who saw earlier versions like 1.6, you'll remember that there was chapters with empty text. There were sections where we duplicated content between chapters. That was all part of the necessary and difficult process of kind of pulling all of this together and making it into a coherent whole. And I don't know that we could have done what we did with version 2 without that early exploration and figuring out what was necessary, just as version 3 kind of builds on what we learned with version 2, but takes it to another level. So, when we talk about the purpose of the guide, we're talking, as I said, about defining the profession of business analysis. That means we need to be able to say, these things, these activities, this task, this kind of work is business analysis, right? So what is it that makes something business analyst? Because as all of you know, when we're working as business analysts, we're often asked to do all sorts of things, right? I mean, I can look back on my career and I remember that I spent a lot of my time doing things like testing software systems, managing help desks, running training, doing project management, developing project plans, all sorts of work. But how much of that had to do with business analysis? In other words, how much of it was actually about analyzing the business, about understanding what the business needed and coming up with solutions or recommending solutions that would help the business move forward? That was one of the first things we really had to do, was figure out what it was that we meant by business analysis. And so we said that ultimately that's what it is. Business analysis is about the analysis of business, right? It's about how we help businesses figure out what they need. So a lot of that comes from stakeholders, because the stakeholders are the people who have the value, who need a solution, and so we certainly need their information. We also get information from our developers and other groups about what they're able to build. And from all of that, we had to then say, okay, well, what are the things that you need to be able to do in order to achieve that, right? So what work does a person do in order to figure out what solutions are needed and to recommend the appropriate solutions? You know, you may not be the one who decides what the solution is or finds all the options, but you do need to be able to say, yeah, this is the one that will best meet the business goal. And then what knowledge or understanding or competencies do you need to have in order to do that work? So with all of that, the version 2 team spent a great deal of time trying to come up with a succinct and clear definition for what was and was not business analysis. And we actually used this definition very extensively during development of version 2, because we tried to make sure that every task we listed in the BABOK supported this actual definition of business analysis, that we could see how it linked back to this fundamental set of concepts. We also tried to make sure that the techniques we included supported this, right? So what we concluded is that business analysis is really essentially about understanding the business need, and then understanding what solutions are out there that can address that business need and identifying the best one. And so quite naturally, when we came to work on version 3, the team decided to take a step back and revisit this definition. We thought there was an opportunity potentially to simplify it, to reduce the number of concepts in it. There are things like, for instance, we have a list here of structure, policies, and operations of an organization. The downside of a list like that is that people might look at that and say, well, okay, you don't say IT systems, so does that mean that a business analyst doesn't get involved in IT, right? So you want to think about all the words in here and say, okay, is there a better way to get this across? Could we even potentially get to the point where we could tweak it? And we didn't quite, but we came close. So at this point, there is a revised draft. There we go. So what the team did is they came up with a shorter definition that still captures the same meaning. And this is the proposed definition for version 3. Now, obviously, we're going to go through a feedback process. We're going to evaluate it. So anything we say about version 3 may not be what you see in the final draft, but this is what we're working with at this point in time. So the revised definition, it says, business analysis is the practice of enabling change in an organizational context by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. And you'll notice that some of the words there are bolded, and there's a very good reason for that. But let me get into the definition itself. The first thing we say is that business analysis is the practice of enabling change. And the reason we say that is that unless you're planning to alter or change an organization or evaluating a possible change, there's not a lot of reason to perform business analysis. Things are just going to stay the same. If there's no reason why anything should be modified, there's very little reason to do the analytical work, right? Now, in some cases, as a BA, you're going to do this work, and you're going to say, you know what, any possible change is going to cost us more than it's actually worth. And that's fine. That is part of your role, right? But the important thing is that you are making it possible for change to occur. We say enabling because as a business analyst, when I make my recommendation or I assess the situation, that doesn't in and of itself make anything happen. Somebody has to take that information, take that recommendation, and do something with it in order to cause there to be actual change. Next bit of it says, in an organizational context. And what we wanted to stress there was that there's a lot of kind of things you can analyze. There's a lot of different kinds of analysis work you can do. You know, if you want to lose weight, I can do all sorts of analysis of how much I'm eating and how much I'm exercising and how I should adjust that. And that is change, right? That is analysis of change, but it isn't really business analysis. Business analysis has to occur in the context of understanding the business of an operation, what it does, or an organization, what it does, why is it doing it, what are its goals, what is it trying to achieve. You know, business analysis isn't limited to for-profit organizations, but it is about understanding an organization, a group of people, a group of stakeholders that have some set of common purposes. Next, we talk about defining needs and recommending solutions. And it's important to recognize as business analysts, we do both, right? We ask ourselves and we ask our stakeholders, what do they really need? What problems are they facing? What challenges are they encountering? And why are those things important? Why do they need to do something about them, right? What is the problem and why is it a problem and what's the value of solving it? But we also don't just stop there, because in almost every context we work in, we're working within the context of defining some kind of solution, right? So if you are, say, doing requirements for a software application, you are doing at a very high level defining a solution, right? Now, obviously, that is going to get passed on to somebody else, the developers who actually build it, but nevertheless, you are talking about what it's going to do, how it's going to do it, where it's going to work, right? So it isn't simply a what versus how, as many people say. As we explore what is possible in the system, we will figure out different trade-offs and different balances, and we will have to understand what it is we are actually trying to achieve, which is the final bit of this sentence that is about delivering value to stakeholders. That's to say, with business analysis, we must always be focused on what is the benefit of this to our stakeholders. Our stakeholders can be the organization as a whole, that is the business goals and objectives. It can be people within the organization. It might be customers. It might even be the project team that's working to build a solution. One of the trickiest things, part of the role of business analysis, is understanding how those stakeholder needs can interact and how we maximize the value delivered to the overall set of stakeholders. So we won't go into the core concept model in detail, but many of you will have seen this before. We've done articles about it in the newsletter. And the point here is that when we take this definition of business analysis, one of the things that we try to do is embed the core concepts that we discovered in that definition. So there are really 6 core concepts that seem to cover all the major things that a business analyst has to worry about. All the models we develop, all the requirements we write, all the work we do embeds one or more of these 6 core concepts in them. So, you know, going around the list, we have change, we have context, we have needs, we have solutions, we have value, and we have stakeholders. And the important thing to remember about this model is that each one of these concepts is intimately connected to every one of the other concepts. For instance, we often talk about how, business needs change from time to time. Well, they can change for a number of reasons, right? If we have a new stakeholder join our organization, if a new person comes to the leadership team, that person may not have the same perception of what is valuable to the organization as his or her predecessor. And as a result, what is valuable changes. And when we change our perception of value, we also change what is needed, what solutions are viable for it, and how we're going to change the organization itself. If any one of these things change, it can lead to a series of alterations that reverberate throughout all the work we're doing. And the core concept model is something that deserves and is going to get a session all by itself. So what's in the guide itself? Well, right now there are a number of major areas. The first is the introduction. And many people skip over the introduction because introductions are boring. The fact is that our introduction, even in version 2, lays down a lot of really critical information. So if you haven't read it, I suggest you go back and do so because it explains how everything else ties together. It talks about what we mean by a requirement in the BACC. It talks about who the stakeholders are, why those stakeholders are important, how tasks connect to techniques, what the relationship is there. So always definitely read the introduction, get a sense of how things hang together. In terms of the knowledge areas, we have 7 knowledge areas in version 2, although one of them is a little different from the others. We have roughly the same set of knowledge areas in version 3, although there will be some changes to them. At the top of the present slide here, we have business analysis, planning, and monitoring. And that knowledge area covers the tasks necessary to figure out what it is that you are actually doing. So we always need some kind of plan, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be a complicated 350-page Gantt chart with all sorts of network activities, but we do need to say, hey, we're going to go talk to these people, we're going to get this information from them, and this is what we're going to do with that information. Elicitation is the knowledge area that talks about how we get the real information we need from our stakeholders. We use the term elicitation specifically because in many cases, people talk about requirements gathering or collecting requirements, and that implies that all you have to do is go out to your stakeholders and say, hey, what do you want? And they'll tell you. And in practice, we know that that's not how it works. We know that sometimes they don't know what they want. Sometimes they don't want to tell you what they want. Sometimes they want to talk about something that they think is a solution to their problem rather than what is actually a solution to, right? You run into all of these situations. And elicitation is the work necessary to pull out from them what it is they think they want, why they want those things, and get to the real problems that we are trying to solve or real information we can use to figure out what solutions are viable. Requirements management and communication as a knowledge area then talks about largely building consensus and agreement among our stakeholders as to what it is we need to do. So as a business analyst, you don't own value. You don't typically own the direction for the organization, right? That typically falls in the role of sponsor. As a business analyst, you may recommend, but you really have to worry about building consensus among your stakeholders as to what is the right thing to do and making sure that all concerned parties genuinely understand what it is that the organization has chosen to do. And that's what this KA addresses. Then in the center here, we have the various kinds of analytical work. Enterprise analysis is typically business analysis work done that goes to some extent outside the context of any project or initiative or change you're working on. It's about looking at the broader context, in this case, the enterprise, and understanding how does this thing that we're doing fit into it. How do we know that we're solving a real problem that the organization has? What's the value of solving that problem? And is there ever a point where we need to change direction or rethink what we're doing in order to really benefit the organization? So in a lot of companies, there's a whole set of enterprise analysis activities that are done up front, and a common complaint I hear from project VAs is that they don't get to participate in those activities and are often not done very well. And I think that is a very valid concern, but I would say that one thing to remember is that you always end up doing this stuff over and over again throughout the life cycle of any change, right? I have never made it all the way through any project I've worked on without having to go back at some point and re-examine the fundamental assumptions of that project and generally change them to a greater or lesser extent. Requirements analysis involves working within the scope of that effort to figure out what it is exactly that our stakeholders need. So here we're typically doing things like building various kinds of models, like process models, defining business rules, defining use cases, in order to get a sense of how the solution is going to meet their needs. And we continue that work until we have defined the solution in enough detail that we have confidence that that solution is going to be something our stakeholders want and need and will use, right? And how far you go along that path really depends on what it is you're trying to do. So here we look at things like putting together models, architecting and organizing them so that they fit together so that we know that everything supports everything else, making sure that the analysis models are correct, that they're clear, that they're testable, and that they actually are something that will deliver value. Solution assessment and validation then is the role we play as business analysts in actually participating in the delivery of a solution or a change into the organization. So here we have to look at things like, how do we assess, say, different options that the solution development team have come up with for implementing the change? How do we know that, option A is better than option B? How do we figure out if the organization itself can handle or use the solution? Because, you can roll out a perfect system, and yet if nobody's ready to use it, it still fails, still does not deliver any value. We have to look at how do we know that the system actually does what it is supposed to, right? Not necessarily even what the requirements say it's supposed to, but what people actually need it to do. And how do we monitor the development of the solution over time after it's been rolled out to make sure that it is still delivering value? The underlying competencies are the seventh and last knowledge area, but they're very different from the others. Where all the other knowledge areas talk about tasks, about things you do, about activities you undertake, the underlying competencies are really about the things you have to be good at in order to accomplish those tasks. So they aren't specifically tied to any one task. They can link to and support multiple tasks. But typically, to be an effective business analyst, you're going to have to be able to facilitate conversations among stakeholders. You're going to have to be able to solve problems, to look at the system as a whole, to understand the business you're operating in. All of these things fall within the scope of underlying competencies. Now, these underlying competencies are by no means unique to the business analysis profession, right? All sorts of people in your company will also be able to do those things and should do those things and need to do those things. But they help you be more effective as a business analyst, and so that's why we define them as part of our professional body of knowledge. Then we have techniques, and we have a lot. We have something like 40-odd techniques in version 2, and these are simply the most common techniques based on our assessment of the profession, based on surveys we've run and other things, the ones that are most commonly used by business analysts. There are hundreds of these things out there, and we're not suggesting by any means that the ones in the BACC are the only ones you should or could or will need to use. There are a number of techniques that are not in the BACC that I use on a regular basis, and there are techniques in the BACC that I have never used in my life. I have never, ever had the need to develop a data flow diagram, for example. But I know people who swear by them. The goal of including this set of techniques in the BACC was not to say you should use all of these techniques, and certainly not you should use all of these techniques on every project. The reason they're there is to say, as a senior business analyst and somebody who's experienced as a business analysis professional, you should know what these things are if you run into them, and you should know enough about them in order to be able to figure out if and when they might be useful to you. So the goal here is really to give you a set of techniques that you can learn and understand enough about that you will be able to go into most situations you encounter as a business analyst and be effective. And then last but certainly not least, we have the glossary. And this is just a key set of terms in the business analysis profession that we need to define in order to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, right? And of course, in some cases, in many cases, particular terms get controversial. People argue about language all the time. Certainly, all of you have had that happen with your stakeholders. And frequently, I run into a lot of problems on projects where it turns out that key stakeholders are using the same word to mean two different things. And we get that a lot in business analysis. So we had to develop a glossary to say, at the very least, when we use this term, this is what we mean. Other definitions may be valid, but they don't align to the meaning of the way the word is used in the body of knowledge. And with that, I'm passing it back over to Julian, who will take you through the next set of slides.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was a lovely summary of the body of knowledge. And I know that it's a real struggle to talk about so much in such a short time. It's a very large amount of information in that book. So what I'd like to take you through just very briefly is how you can register for more webinars and where you, for IIBA. If you go to iiba.org and click on the Professional Development tab, that's where the first arrow is shooting to, you will see that there are webinars on the left-hand side. You can also get that from the drop-down at Professional Development. And there are lots of webinars that IIBA does, at least one a week, all kinds of great stuff. So please do register for more webinars, join us. There's a lot of really good information. And our next webinar in this particular series is going to be focused on the BA core concept model, the BACCM. And I will be joined by a couple of members from the core team who I've had the pleasure of working with for almost 2 years now. They've helped architect this. The team has put this thing together. And they will be on to talk about how their understanding of the BABOK guide has changed and been influenced by their understanding of the core concepts and the core concept model. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about the core concepts today. Kevin's given you a very brief overview of what some of those things mean in terms of the BABOK. So we'll get into much deeper dives on that next time and in future episodes. And the folks who will be joining will be Emily I.M. and Matthew Leach, and they're both great folks. You're going to have a good time on that show. And that brings us to the Q&A portion of today's session. We've got over 400 people on the line, so it means that we will not get to every single question, but I will certainly we will certainly do what we can to try to answer as many of your questions as we can. So while Kevin was talking, I started going through and trying to categorize the questions. As many as I could. And one of the first ones, and I'm going to direct this at Kevin, is to talk about the relationship between the body of knowledge, well, the BABOK guide specifically, and other kinds of standards and books. The ones that have come up so far are the PMBOK, TOGAF, and the BA standards from the British Computer Society. So I know, having been on the core team for a long time, that the BABOK guide was not written, in relation to any of those things. It is a standard on its own. But there are relationships to those other things. So Kevin, could you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. So one thing I would quickly differentiate there is that, you mentioned the PMBOK, we mentioned TOGAF, we mentioned the BCS books. It's important to be aware that the BCS stuff on business analysis it's good quality, but it is a book on business analysis, not a standard. There's a difference. The standard has to go through a certain development process. There's a certain level of community input, right? The BCS hasn't done that. What they've done is written a book that is, the opinion of the particular authors who wrote specific chapters in the text. So it's more akin to something like Carl Weger's or Ellen Gottesdiener's books, or many others, Paul Harmon's. All these are very high quality, but they are, really the opinion of the author about business analysis. Now, when we get into formally developed standards like TOGAF or the PMBOK, or quite a few others, what we do there is we have to take a careful look at what that standard is and how it potentially aligns with ours. One of the big questions that I often get, for instance, is how the PMBOK has stuff on, requirements, has stuff on stakeholders. What's the relationship between that and the business analysis body of knowledge? And one of the things that, I learned through my various interactions with PMI, I was even on the 5th edition team, although I only worked on one chapter, is that the PMBOK is not, and this is something that people get very confused by, it is not a description of what a project manager does. The PMBOK, the processes in the PMBOK and in the related ISO standard are supposed to describe the processes that are necessary to manage a project. And that may or may not be done by the project manager. So it is necessary in a project to know what your requirements are. Absolutely. It is necessary in a project to perform QA. But, nobody thinks that a project manager is going to be the one testing the system, right? And it's similar here. A project manager has to be concerned that there is a process for managing the requirements, but it doesn't mean that the project manager is the person who is responsible for the execution of that process, right? So, and similarly, a project manager has to very carefully manage relationships with stakeholders. As business analysts, so do we. So there are areas where the BABOK and the PMBOK overlap, and they should. They absolutely should, because from both the perspective of which both of those were written, they need to include that material. And one thing that we said very definitely was that the business analysis body of knowledge would include everything relevant to the performance of business analysis, whether or not it appeared in another standard. TOGAF is a standard developed by the Open Group, but it specifically is a methodology for enterprise architecture. So what we would say is that, in fact, TOGAF should be a particular way that you perform enterprise-level business analysis tasks. It tells you a specific order in which those tasks are performed, a specific set of deliverables that will be produced in order to achieve a specific outcome. The BOK is a bit of an abstraction further back. It talks about universals, whereas TOGAF or RUC or OpenUP or any other kind of methodology really is a specific way of going about doing business analysis in a specific context. And I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you got right in there, Kevin. Thank you very much. The next question I'm going to direct to Kathleen. There are a number of questions that relate to the perception of the body of knowledge in the community, ranging anywhere from something that you only need to read if you're going to get certified to stuff that's more complicated than what I do or doesn't exactly match what I do. So I'm curious, Kathleen, if you can let people know a little bit about what the BABOK guide means or should mean for business analysts. Like, is there a, how would you recommend that the guide be used by your average VA working in your average project in an average organization?
But no one is average, so I don't know.
Well, I know that, but we can't speak to all 493 people all at once. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, first of all, any of these things must make sense. So I know that sounds very simplistic, but what the body of knowledge provides is a is a structured way of approaching how you do your job. And once you get over the fact that there's standard terms and a standard way of writing this, it actually is very, very simple. The concepts are very, very simple. I mean, Kevin gave you, I thought, a very thorough description of the various knowledge areas. But when you think about what it is you're trying to do, you just think about how you can apply it almost anything you do. I know Kevin was talking about business analysis being about business specifically, but just the approach of how you can apply the body of knowledge is relevant to any kind of change initiative, even in your personal life. And when you bring it down and apply it to that basic level, the concepts become so much more simple to understand and embrace. So you as a practitioner, regardless of how average you may be or how average your organization is, it's the fact that it's a consistent way of helping your organization work through understanding and managing the change that it has to go through will enable you to be so much more successful. It also is very powerful because it provides a common set of terms. I think one of the things that you've actually really been successful when people start using the vocabulary that you use in doing your work. And so the value of the BABOK is also that set of consistent terms that you can use to communicate with your stakeholders in your project team. So it's actually very simple concepts that help you identify and manage change, and it also provides you with a set of terms that you can use with all your stakeholders to have a common understanding of what's actually happening. So I think it's really relevant regardless of how complex or how simple the work is that you do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kathleen. I'm going to take us back to to a previous slide for the next set of questions, and that would be, I believe, somewhere around here. Let's talk about the knowledge areas. So we have a bunch of questions that are related to knowledge areas. For one of them is there an order for the knowledge areas? What's the sequence? And Kevin mentioned earlier, and I cannot stress this highly enough, the BABOK does not describe a business analysis process. You cannot go from task to task to task in a specific order every time, or in fact, in general, because they are referring to the kinds of work that you need to do, but you may need to repeat things, you may skip around from task to task. Even within a single elicitation session, you might be doing requirements analysis and documentation and communication and elicitation, and these things don't happen just one after the other. So when you look at the body of knowledge, be very careful to remember that business analysis work can start anywhere and can end anywhere on any task. There are a few tasks that are much more common, of course. Kevin, off the top of my head, I can't remember which ones they are, but there's one in enterprise analysis and one in solution assessment and validation.
Yeah, so if you are coming into a brand new area and you're being asked to look at what you need to do first, you're probably either going to start with things like in solution assessment and validation, you might evaluate solution performance in order to see if there is a problem with business process that needs to be addressed. You'll probably need to, very early on, identify at least some stakeholders. In fact, I'd say that's probably going to be near the top of your list no matter what you're doing, because if you don't know who the stakeholders are, you can't identify any needs and you can't do anything really. So you really have to know those things. But as Julian said, when you're running on a project or a change initiative and you're partway through it, you could be doing all of the tasks. You could be doing tasks in every KA in one afternoon in one requirement session. Now, it is typically true that very early, if you're looking at a typical project life cycle, especially waterfall thing, you will probably do a lot more enterprise analysis early on than you will later. You will then probably move to doing a lot of requirements analysis, and then you'll be doing a lot of solution assessment and validation. But even when you're doing solution assessment and validation, right, you can hit a point where you're in the middle of a rollout and you find you missed a key stakeholder, and now you have to figure out what their needs are. So you're going to have to do enterprise analysis to assess their area of the workplace. You're going to have to come up with their requirements, and you're going to have to implement it. So there's no point when you're doing at any point during any project life cycle where you're only doing stuff from one KA.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. And when I was a beginning BA and just starting to understand, I guess, version 1.6 at the time, it was not clear to me, sort of with my first read, that what I was seeing was things that, or these tasks that happen in any order. And as a junior BA, as a beginner, I was really looking for just tell me what to do next. And it took some time and some education for me to be able to understand that you have to apply some judgment, and you have to be able to perform all of these tasks at some level to be able to do anything as a business analyst. It's not sliced and diced out like a process model is. And our discussion here about enterprise analysis actually brings us into a couple of different questions. One is about the relationship between enterprise analysis and portfolio management. And in version 2 of the body of knowledge, enterprise analysis really has the sense of project initiation. That's certainly not the only thing that enterprise analysis refers to, but it's easy to see how it sort of progresses through the development of an idea into a business case, and then the initiation or the triggering of some specific change effort. That's an easy way to read it. And that is certainly in the realm of portfolio management in many organizations, where you might compare a set of business cases to one another to make a decision about funding. But enterprise analysis really also applies to looking at the context, the surroundings for any change. And it's a bit harder to see in version 2 than we would like, and that's something that has been a focus for the version 3 team. And by the way, for all the people who are wondering about version 3, it's not coming out until 2014, and you will be able to be part of the public review before then. But I just wanted to mention that right now. So, Kevin, the questions are, when is EA performed? Is it really portfolio management? What are these enterprise BA folks? Do you want to take a short stab at that?
Sure. So one of the things that we quite intentionally did with version 2 is that we made the decision to focus on what most BA practitioners were doing, which is business analysis at the project or individual change initiative level, right? So we didn't look at enterprise business analysis as our first step. We recognized that it was important. We do view it as business analysis, but we had to contain the scope of our effort somehow, and that was one of the choices we made. With version, what we've done since then, actually, is that we put together an enterprise business analysis team, and they spent quite a bit of time hashing through what was and wasn't enterprise business analysis, how it fit, what kinds of things they would do, and that gave us a framework to be able to take a step back and say, okay, now can we identify what are these things that are enterprise business analysis, and how do things like project and portfolio management particularly fit into that? So what we can say is that enterprise analysis, because of its project orientation, project focus, would talk a lot about how you start a project, and that comes out of the portfolio management process. With version 3, we can actually map portfolio management directly into the body of knowledge. So we can actually map all the tasks that a portfolio manager performs against the BABOK in version 3 and say, okay, here are how the portfolio management processes relate to the business analysis task at an enterprise level. So when you ask what is an enterprise BA, there are actually a bunch of different kinds of enterprise BA. And I would say that as a whole, strategic planning is enterprise business analysis. I actually just did IIBA strategic planning, and it was definitely BA work. It felt like BA work. It was the same kind of things. I was listing requirements. I was recommending solutions, right? Business and enterprise architecture, portfolio management, these are all things that a enterprise BA would have to be able to do.
So, thank you, Kevin. It's good to know that the job that I do as an enterprise BA actually is business analysis. Thank you for confirming that, particularly since I work for you. I want to open up a can of worms, and this is one where I think Kathleen and Kevin may both have a point of view. I certainly do. Where does BABOK, what does BABOK have to say about agile versus waterfall is the question. And I think it's, to some degree, not quite the right question. The BABOK talks about the way that BAs are involved in change from a couple of different points of view, particularly in the BA planning and monitoring tasks. It talks about change-driven approaches and, oh goodness, the words just fallen out of my head. Kevin, what's the other approach?
Plan-driven.
Thank you, plan-driven approach. And from those points of view, agile fits more into the change-driven approach. What really the BABOK is trying to get into there is that waterfall and agile are both trying to control the risks associated with making an organizational change, but they try to control those risks in very different ways. A plan-driven approach is trying to use certainty, to trying to figure out all the things that could go right, could go wrong, and coordinate tightly to achieve the value goals that the change is supposed to achieve. Whereas agile is trying to use flexibility to do the same thing. Let's not take too big a bite at a time. Let's do small changes and deal with uncertainty that way. So, agile versus waterfall, from my point of view, certainly it's not a versus. These are different ways of managing the risk associated with the change. Kathleen, I know you've had some interesting conversations about agile and waterfall over the years as it relates to IIBA. Do you have anything you want to add about that?
Well, probably not. I mean, mine is, I'll use the term more of a layman's perspective because I'm certainly not the expert in business analysis. But the body of knowledge, as again, it's the things you do as a business analyst to help you identify and manage change. And as you mentioned, both of them are about managing change, but their approach is how they handle the risk. So the techniques and the tools that you use are the same regardless. How you apply them may be different. So I think that the BABOK is, we call it methodology agnostic, and it is definitely that. It can be applied against any of those.
Yeah, that's such an important idea that the methodology that you're using is almost orthogonal. It's at right angles to the content of the body of knowledge, which can be applied across basically any methodology. So we have about 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give Kevin and Kathleen a chance to have a few closing remarks. Kevin, why don't you give us a 60-second little send-off about the BABOK guide and your point of view on this webinar series, and then we'll go to Kathleen.
Sure, although I do want to take a moment to mention something that wasn't discussed during the previous conversation. One thing to remember is that we actually, in collaboration with the Agile Alliance, have developed a Agile extension to the Business Analysis body of knowledge, and that's going through final review after a period of public feedback, and we expect to have it available out there in the world pretty soon, within the next few months. So that is being closed out, at least at this stage of development. And what we found as part of that effort was that, yes, the things that we say a business analyst does still need to be done in an agile environment. There still is a whole bunch of business analysis work. Some of what you do may change. Some of what you focus on may change. In particular, there may be a need for very heavy business analysis work to get the business itself to agree on what it does and how it operates so that you can then rapidly develop the software systems to do that, right? So I do encourage you to take a look at the Agile extension. The draft is still available to IIBA members as well as members of the Agile Alliance, and that may hopefully help address your questions there. With that, I'm then going to say, for this particular webinar series, the reason we wanted to do it was to actually reach out to and engage the BA community, which is, say, you, in helping to shape the direction of the body of knowledge and our standards efforts, right? The point of all of this work we're doing is to make sure that we build standards that help you do your jobs better as business analysts. So they should be useful to you. They should help guide you. They should be relevant. They should help indicate what you can learn and where you can grow. And the only way for us to do that is to make sure that you have a very strong voice in the direction they go. So we wanted to both give you that opportunity to talk to us and to give you some insights into why things may have been done the way they were done, and potentially ideas that you can take back and use in your organization every day.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Kathleen, we're just slightly over, so I'll give you a few seconds for a final remark.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. I think that we all recognize that one way to drive recognition of us as professionals is to have a common way of doing our work and demonstrating value. And our goal in engaging you in this whole BABOK evolution is to ensure that we're providing you, as Kevin said, with the right tool, with the right language to enable you to be successful in helping your organizations move forward. So keep us apprised of approaches or input that you want us to consider. We really want to make these valuable opportunities for you to participate.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And from me, thank you all for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you on. Great questions. We couldn't focus on the CBAC exam very much on this because this is about the BABOK guide, not the exam itself. Please do go to the certification tab at IIBA.org if you have questions about certification. There are links in the notes here, and I'll put up some more links in our blog at community.iiba.org/BABOK. Thank you, and wherever you are in the world today, have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, or night.